today's topic, for those of you who tuned in to hear an actual topic and not us chit-chat, is the vagus nerve.
I think sometimes there's so much focus on the vagus nerve and less focus on the brain and the gut as well.
Mm-hmm.
And they're both communicating via the vagus nerve and both play a role in basically activating the nerve or, for us using the nerve. So I do think that that's a key point too. Like before we dive too deep into the vagus nerve, like you do want to also, if there's a brain issue, if there's a gut issue, making sure you're addressing those areas as well and not just focusing on like hardcore on gargling and things like that activate the vagus nerve and basically thinking that that's going to heal the whole brain gut axis. And I think I've seen sort of that mentality of late where it's like, okay, all you have to do is just gargle or something and everything in the nervous system is going to be aligned.
It's kind of like, you could almost imagine it like a barbell. Like the vagus nerve is just the stick that connects the two weights on either end of the barbell. So you can't just lift the stick a whole bunch of times and things that you're going to get very far. You also need to pay attention to the weight that is on either side of the barbell, right? So I think not just focusing on the vagus nerve for the sake of the vagus nerve in isolation while not doing justice to the other two pieces of the puzzle is a worthwhile conversation to have. And what I've seen too, I don't know, you'll have to share with me. Well, you don't have to, but I would like you to share with me your experiences. That sounds so bossy. But I would say I've had patients, and I've seen this online too, where people are like, okay, cool. I'm going to do vagus nerve stimulation. I'm going to gargle. I'm going to use a TENS unit. I'm going to buy an essential oil. I'm going to take a supplement. I'm going to do whatever. But it's almost like there's this effort to like force the vagus nerve to do what you want to do or like muscle your way through. Like, come on, vagus nerve, do your job, darn it. But if you are, this is so hard to word. It's like you can't heal things by forcing your body into doing things. And I think that that's especially true for the vagus nerve because a lot of people, myself included, I think our vagus nerves get fried and our nervous system and our balance gets off kilter because we push through so much in our life. Like we take emotions or things that we should say but we don't want to, and we just like bottle it up and shove it down. Or we wake up and we're exhausted but we go to work anyway. Or we're fatigued, or like we have a relationship that we are just like done with and we muscle through anyway and we grit our teeth through it anyway. And there's so much of that, especially in American life, but I think even the world largely, where we are forcing ourselves and forcing our bodies to do things that maybe we shouldn't. And then, if we're doing a lot of that kind of stuff and not being mindful to that, like the stressors that are actually bogging down our vagus nerve, and then we're like, oh, and then I'm going to take this supplement or rub this essential oil on to get that silly vagus nerve to do its damn job. It's like, this is like another symptom of the greater issue. Like you're trying to force your way through life in some of these situations that need to be rectified. And also you're trying to like force the vagus nerve to do its job when it doesn't want to do its job because it's overwhelmed. And maybe you need to take a pause and acknowledge that like you're overwhelmed too, you're stressed too. I don't know if you've seen that before, but I think this like mentality to just push through and push the vagus nerve to do its job can be a symptom of a greater picture.
Right, and I think too, I think what we're saying is pretty similar, like even not focusing on the brain or the gut too, and just like going all in on the vagus nerve and like hitting that really hard. I think there's like a similar mentality, slight different, but I see the same people doing that where they're kind of just focusing on the vagus nerve and like pushing. And you're right, it's almost like if you went from not exercising at all and then you're running, like all of a sudden you're like, I'm just going to run 8 miles and do that 7 days a week, your body's going to get burnt out. Yeah. I definitely see that. I always wonder about that too with things like TENS units and some of the vagal stimulators. Like, I don't know how you really calibrate that properly for the individual, and maybe there's a strategy. I just haven't really used those types of devices because they're pretty expensive, and I just, again, I'm it's not something I typically use. But yeah, I definitely agree with you there. And I think too, in general, what I've seen is starting slow seems to help from a soreness standpoint. Like, if I had someone doing singing, humming, and gargling, what I've seen, if they go too hard, they're like, oh yeah, my throat's sore. Like, I actually feel sore doing some of this stuff. So I'm like, let's like slow it down a little bit, and we can build up a little bit slower when it comes to your vagus nerve.
Yeah. And it's so tough because I think that probably everybody who listens to this podcast, but everybody I've ever worked with, certainly, they want to feel better yesterday.
Right.
Like,
right.
Yeah, and it's like, to their credit, a lot of these people are really passionate and excited. Like, when they hear of a new thing, they're like, whoa, the vagus nerve, and I can stimulate it? Cool. And it's this mentality of like, I want to feel better right now. So they go all in and they do something. But that's why I'm really cautious, and I tell people, like, don't go all in. Again, because you can't trick the vagus nerve. We can try to get it to do some push-ups or try to do some bicep curls, but you also need to work on the foundational stuff too. There's no point exercising one part of your body and then like neglecting the rest of it. In my opinion.
And I do think the gargling thing's interesting. I definitely utilized that more when I first was working with clients, and I still have it as an option of a way to activate the vagus. But I will say compliance is usually pretty low with gargling. It's not something that people look forward to doing. Typically, singing and humming is easier and more enjoyable for people to do as like an activity, from what I've found. Even things like certain breath work tend to be more enjoyable.
Meditation,
so those are
yoga.
Right. So I think, again, usually from what I've found, I've moved more away from gargling. But I usually am like, gargling works if you want to try that too. So I might give them some different options. But yeah, I haven't seen it be an overly compliant area, and it's probably like what you're saying, just it's not necessarily an enjoyable process. And I usually try to pair vagal exercises with meals as well. Like, I try to, if they're gonna do breath work, and I don't necessarily say like it's not helpful if you do it outside of a meal. Because then sometimes they're like, oh, I forgot to do it, and then I just like don't, and I'm like, well, that's okay.
On me.
Right, and I'm like, that's okay. Like, it's not a big deal. You can do it outside of a meal, but you might get like a little bit more benefit if you do it before a meal, just to kind of settle your system down for a minute. But it's the gargling thing's a little bit tricky from what I've seen as a practitioner. It's not necessarily an enjoyable or fun practice.
Yeah, it's not fun. That's why I lean away from that one in particular. I just think, like, would I do it? Probably not. Like, I might do it like diligently for a week, and give it a go, and then I would give up probably if it was me. And I think just anything that gets you in that like rejuvenated, restful state is going to be good for the vagus nerve. Basically, anything that relaxes you or lets you take a freaking chill pill or brings you joy probably has the ability to improve vagal nerve tone. So again, like painting the picture of what not to do again. You could have a person who is gargling their little heart away, or using a TENS unit, or trying to boss around their vagus nerve, but then, they're stuck in a miserable commute that they hate, going to work for a boss that they hate, and like they're always rushed and they don't have time, and like they're kind of like meh on their spouse. It's like, these are the things like, is the vagus nerve work going to make a profound impact for that person? But if that same person like makes some shifts in their life, even if it's not getting a divorce or getting a new job, which are huge life changes, even if it's like, have a hobby, like schedule some time in your life and just draw a line in the sand and tell your employer, tell your spouse, whatever, like, this is me time. I'm going to get acupuncture once a week. I'm going to do painting. I'm going to go, out on a lake. I'm going to do something for myself 2 hours once a week. Hard no to everything else. But just like have some structured time in your life. I find that if you don't schedule time for yourself, it's not going to happen. Because there's always a million things that you could be doing and emails you could be answering. But if you know, like, okay, Friday I leave early, or Thursday I leave early at 3 o'clock because I have a yoga class at 4 o'clock that I go to in Midtown, or whatever. Like, have that on the calendar and make that your time, and don't let anybody else mess with that. Because that's really what will actually do good things for your vagus nerve, I think.
Right. And I think that usually areas that I focus in on, and you've hit the nail on the head with them, are like connection. So how connected is someone? And lots of times if you're struggling with SIBO and IBS, it's very easy to disconnect. Because you're either having symptoms, or you don't want to go to that restaurant, or parties give you stress if there's not food for you. And I get that because I've been there. But even if there's situations that you don't necessarily enjoy, and it's just going to be that way for a little bit, like as you're moving forward and with your gut health, finding other ways to connect that aren't necessarily food related. It's harder now with COVID. I think COVID's definitely frying some vagus nerves. So I think I always zero in on connection, whether it's like to your immediate family, or if there's just a need to connect more. And then I think what you're saying too, like hobbies and having like me time that's not necessarily connecting to someone else, but connecting to yourself in a way, it can be really powerful. I definitely would recommend getting a puppy. We were talking about that before this call, how now I got one puppy and I want to get more puppies.
I fully endorse this.
Right. My husband did not. So Nikki is telling me yes. I need to get some more yeses on my side.
Everybody, comment in the YouTube below. Say yes. Yes, Amy, get that other puppy.
Right. So I think that, again, puppy's been interesting for me personally, just because I was the holdout, didn't want to get a puppy. And I know, I was the holdout. I was like, I've never had a puppy, so I just didn't know.
I knew you.
I know.
Continue.
Okay. So we got the puppy, and I'm like obsessed with it. Every morning we have like a routine that I do where I like kind of wake him up nice, rub him all down. Like I don't try to rush him to like go outside and pee. I just kind of give him some rubs for like 5 to 10 minutes. He finally gets up and goes pee, and then we go by his food bowl, and usually I'll fill up his food bowl, and before he eats, he'll get a toy and just sit in my lap for like 10 minutes. And then
the food bowl has food in it, and your dog is willingly, oh my gosh. See, we've had beagles, and a beagle would never do that in 1,000 years.
And I will say sometimes he'll like go and get a mouthful of food and then come and sit on my lap until he's done chewing, and he might go get another mouthful and sit back on my lap.
That's adorable. Not at all what I'm familiar with beagles. Oh man.
Well, again, it's great though. We have like this little flow to but it like starts my day off in a very relaxing way versus just like getting into like my like to-dos, getting breakfast done. So it like starts my morning out slow and like nice.
That's nice.
So again, sometimes even just, we always think about like the meditations and the breath works, like all these really sort of structured stress management and vagal toning activities. But I think you're exactly right, looking at it from a broader standpoint of how is your environment, everything in your environment that could be conducive to strengthening your vagus is really important to pay attention to. Yeah, I've had a number of clients who have used a TENS unit before, and they've all seemed to like it. I mean, the ones that I remember using it. So yeah, I've just never been like trained on how to set that up and how to do it. But I've always been intrigued by it, so I'm glad you were giving some deets out.
Yeah.
But not all the deets, right?
Yeah, not all the deets. Sorry, guys. Yeah, and I think it's not intrinsically dangerous.
Right.
Although I will say, for record too, when you do the vagus nerve stim with the ear, you actually want to do the left ear only, because the right vagus nerve goes to the heart as well as the rest of the innards, and the left does not. It goes past the heart, and it just goes into the innards. So, just in case you don't want to induce some weird like arrhythmia or, something weird like that,